Maria Santos had always been good with languages. Growing up in a small Texas border town, she spoke Spanish at home with her grandmother and English everywhere else. By the time she graduated high school, she was fluent in both languages and had picked up some Arabic from a friend whose family had immigrated from Syria. Her guidance counselor told her she had a gift, something that could take her places. What the counselor didn't mention was that some of those places would be dusty forward operating bases in Afghanistan, where the sound of incoming mortars could wake you at 3 in the morning. Maria never imagined that her talent for languages would lead her to wear a military uniform, let alone find herself in the middle of a firefight that would change everything she thought she knew about herself. The path that brought Maria to that moment began 3 years earlier when she was working at a community college in El. She taught English as a second language classes during the day and took night courses to finish her degree in international relations. The work was rewarding, but the pay was terrible. She was 24 years old and still living with her parents, trying to save enough money to move out and maybe travel somewhere beyond the border towns she had known her entire life. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning when a military recruiter visited her ESL classroom. Staff Sergeant was there to talk about opportunities for bilingual speakers in the Army. He wasn't the typical recruiter who hung around shopping malls looking for teenagers. This was different. The military needed people who could speak multiple languages, people who could help bridge the gap between American soldiers and local populations in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. "We're looking for translators and interpreters," Staff Sergeant explained to the small group that had gathered after class. "People who can help our soldiers communicate with locals, gather intelligence, and build relationships that can save lives." Maria raised her hand. What kind of training would be involved? Basic military training first, then specialized language and cultural training. You'd be working directly with combat units, but your primary job would be communication, not fighting. The phrase, "not fighting," stuck with Maria. She had never considered herself a fighter. She was the person who broke up arguments, not started them. She was the one who helped people understand each other when language barriers got in the way. The idea of using her skills to help soldiers and local people communicate seemed like a natural fit. Her parents were skeptical when she told them about the opportunity. Her father, a mechanic who had worked with his hands his entire life, worried about sending his daughter into a war zone. Her mother, a nurse who had seen too many young people come home broken, begged her to reconsider. "There are other ways to use your language skills," her mother said over dinner that night. "You could work for the government here, or maybe get a job with an international company. You don't need to go to war to help people." But Maria had already made up her mind. She had spent her whole life in the same small corner of Texas. The world was bigger than that, and she wanted to be part of something important. The recruiter had talked about how translators were saving lives every day, helping soldiers avoid dangerous misunderstandings and building trust with local communities. It felt like meaningful work. 2 weeks later, she was at the military entrance processing station in San, taking the oath of enlistment. The ceremony was brief and formal, but when she raised her right hand and repeated the words about defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, something shifted inside her. She was no longer just Maria Santos, ESL teacher from El. She was Private Santos, United States Army. Basic combat training at Fort Moore in Georgia was harder than anything Maria had ever done. The drill sergeant seemed to take special pleasure in pushing the college-educated recruits harder than the others. They called her Professor, in a tone that made it clear it wasn't meant as a compliment. "Professor Santos thinks she's too smart for push-ups," Drill Sergeant Williams would announce when Maria struggled with the physical training. "Maybe the professor can explain to us why her arms are shaking after 20 reps. But Maria learned to push through. She discovered muscles she didn't know she had and found that she could run farther than she thought possible. More importantly, she learned to work as part of a team. The other soldiers in her platoon came from all over the country and all walks of life. There was Jackson from rural Alabama who could barely read but could field strip an M4 rifle blindfolded. There was from San Francisco whose parents wanted him to be a doctor but who had joined the Army to prove he was tough enough. There was Williams from Detroit who had grown up in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city but who looked out for the younger soldiers like they were his little brothers. The weapons training surprised Maria the most. She had never fired a gun before enlisting, but something about the precision and focus required appealed to her. Her instructor, Sergeant First Class Martinez, noticed her steady hands and calm breathing. "Santos, you're a natural shooter," he told her after she qualified expert on her first try. "Most people take 3 or 4 attempts to get sharpshooter, let alone expert. You ever consider trying out for marksmanship team?" Maria shook her head. "I'm going to be a translator, Sergeant. I won't need to be shooting much." Sergeant Martinez gave her a look that she would remember later. "In the Army, Santos, you never know what you'll need to do. Better to be prepared for everything." After basic combat training came advanced individual training for military occupational specialty, translator and interpreter. The school was at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and it was unlike anything Maria had experienced. The intensity of the language training was incredible. Students were expected to achieve near-native fluency in their target language within months, not years. Maria was assigned to the Pashto program. Pashto was one of the primary languages spoken in Afghanistan, and the military needed more interpreters who could work with the local population there. The language was completely different from Spanish or Arabic. The writing system used a modified Arabic script, but the grammar and vocabulary were from an entirely different language family. Her instructor was a civilian contractor named Dr. Ahmadi, a former professor from Kabul University who had fled Afghanistan when the Taliban took control in the 1990s. He was a small, quiet man who spoke 6 languages fluently and had a gentle way of correcting mistakes that never made students feel stupid. "Language is more than words," Dr. Ahmadi would tell the class. "It is culture, it is history, it is the way people see the world. To truly understand a language, you must understand the people who speak it." The cultural training was as important as the language instruction. Maria learned about the traditional code of honor that governed much of Afghan society. She studied the complex tribal structures and the centuries of conflict that had shaped the country. She learned about the role of women in traditional Afghan society and how to navigate conversations that might be sensitive. During her time at DLI, Maria also continued her military training. She qualified on additional weapon systems and took courses in field communications and basic medical care. The Army wanted its translators to be more than just linguists. They needed to be soldiers first, capable of operating in combat environments and contributing to mission success. The physical training continued as well, and Maria found herself getting stronger and more confident. She volunteered for additional training opportunities, including a basic mountaineering course and a combat lifesaver certification. Some of her classmates thought she was crazy for taking on extra training when the language coursework was already so demanding. "Why are you doing all this extra stuff?" asked her roommate, Private Johnson, who was struggling to pass the basic Pashto requirements. "We're going to be sitting in air-conditioned offices talking to people, not climbing mountains." But Maria had been thinking about what Sergeant Martinez had told her back in basic training. In the Army, you never knew what you would need to do. Better to be prepared for everything. The training culminated with a field exercise that simulated the kind of work they would be doing downrange. Students were paired with role players who spoke only their target language and given scenarios based on real-world situations. Maria's exercise involved negotiating with a village elder about water rights while gathering intelligence about insurgent activity in the area. The role player, an Afghan immigrant who worked with the school, stayed in character throughout the exercise. He tested not just Maria's language skills, but her cultural knowledge and her ability to read between the lines. When he mentioned that his nephew had been asking questions about American patrol schedules, Maria had to decide whether to press for more information or back off to avoid seeming suspicious. "You did well," Dr. Ahmadi told her after the exercise. "Your Pashto is excellent, but more importantly, you listened to what he was not saying. That skill will serve you well in Afghanistan." Graduation from DLI was a proud moment. Maria's parents had driven out from Texas to attend the ceremony, and they seemed surprised by the transformation in their daughter. She stood, moved with more confidence, and spoke with an authority that hadn't been there before. She was still their Maria, but she was also something new. After graduation, Maria received her orders. She would be deploying to Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment as an embedded translator. The Rangers were special operations forces, elite soldiers who conducted some of the most dangerous missions in the country. Most translators worked with regular infantry units or stayed on large, secure bases. Working with the Rangers meant operating from small outposts and going on missions where she might be the only American woman for miles. The news surprised everyone, including Maria herself. Translators didn't usually get assigned to special operations units, especially not fresh graduates from DLI. When she asked her assignment officer about it, he just shrugged. The Rangers specifically requested a female translator with your language skills and security clearance, he said. Apparently, they've got some missions coming up where they'll need to communicate with Afghan women, and they need someone who can handle herself in a combat environment. Maria thought about that phrase, handle herself in a combat environment. She had been trained as a soldier, but she had never been in combat. None of her training could really prepare her for what it would be like to be shot at or to see people die. She wondered if she was ready for what was coming. 2 weeks before her deployment, Maria received additional training at Fort Benning. The Rangers put all their attached personnel through a condensed version of their own training programs to make sure everyone could keep up with the pace of their operations. The physical standards were higher than anything Maria had experienced, and the tactical training was more advanced than what she had learned in basic combat training. The Ranger instructors were professional but demanding. They didn't care that she was a translator. If she was going to work with Rangers, she needed to be able to move like a Ranger, shoot like a Ranger, and think like a Ranger. They pushed her harder than she had ever been pushed before. Sergeant First Class, a grizzled veteran with 3 combat deployments, became her unofficial mentor during the training. He was the kind of NCO who had probably forgotten more about combat than most soldiers would ever learn. After watching Maria struggle through a particularly difficult tactical exercise, he pulled her aside. "Santos, you've got good instincts, but you're thinking too much," he told her. "In a firefight, you don't have time to think. You have to trust your training and react. The thinking comes before and after, not during." "But I'm a translator," Maria protested. "My job is to think, to process what people are saying and make sure everyone understands." Nodded. "That's true most of the time. But sometimes your job is going to be to survive long enough to do that translating. And sometimes your job might be to help other people survive too. You ready for that?" Maria wasn't sure she was ready for anything, but she nodded anyway. She had committed to this path, and she was going to see it through wherever it led. The night before she left for Afghanistan, Maria called her grandmother. Abuela had been the one who taught her Spanish, who had filled her childhood with stories about their family's history and the importance of helping others understand each other. "Are you scared?" her grandmother asked in Spanish. Maria considered lying, but her grandmother had always been able to see right through her. "Yes, Abuela, I'm scared." "Good," her grandmother said. "Fear keeps you careful, but don't let it keep you from doing what you know is right. You have a gift for helping people understand each other. That's what you've always done, and that's what you'll do over there, just in a different place." "What if I'm not strong enough?" Maria asked. "Strength isn't about muscles. It's about doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. You've got more strength than you know." The next morning, Maria boarded a transport plane at Fort Benning. She was wearing full battle gear for the first time, carrying an M4 rifle and enough ammunition and equipment to sustain her in combat. The rifle felt heavier than it had during training, and the body armor was uncomfortable in a way that hadn't bothered her before. As the plane climbed into the sky, Maria looked out the small window at the American countryside passing below. She thought about her grandmother's words about strength and about what Sergeant had said about trusting her training. In a few hours, she would be in Afghanistan, further from home than she had ever been, in a place where the wrong word or misunderstood gesture could get people killed. She closed her eyes and reviewed her Pashto vocabulary, going through the military and technical terms she had memorized. But she also thought about the conversations she had practiced with Dr. Ahmadi, the subtle ways that language could convey respect or disrespect, the cultural knowledge that might be more important than perfect grammar. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, Private Maria Santos realized that she was no longer just a translator who happened to be in the army. She was a soldier who happened to speak languages. The distinction seemed important, though she couldn't yet explain why. The plane droned on through the night, carrying her toward a war that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. In the cargo hold below, her gear was secured next to the equipment of the Rangers she would soon be joining. Among her personal items was a small photo of her grandmother and a Spanish-English dictionary that had belonged to her mother. These connections to home would soon seem very far away. Afghanistan was waiting, with its mountains and deserts and ancient conflicts. The Rangers were waiting too, elite soldiers who would depend on her skills to communicate with a population caught by the transport plane touched down at airfield just after sunrise. And Maria's first glimpse of Afghanistan was through the small window of a military aircraft. The landscape was brown and dusty, stretched out endlessly under a pale sky. Mountains rose in the distance like ancient guardians, and she could see the sprawling military base below with its maze of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and aircraft parking areas. As she stepped off the plane, the heat hit her like a physical force. Even in the early morning, the air shimmered with temperatures that promised to climb much higher as the day progressed. The smell was different too, dust and diesel fuel mixed with something else she couldn't identify. Later, she would learn it was the scent of a place where too many people lived too close together with not enough infrastructure to support them. A sergeant with a weathered face and tired eyes met her at the terminal. "Santos, I'm Sergeant First Class Mitchell. Welcome to the sandbox. Grab your gear and let's get you processed." The in-processing took most of the day. There were briefings about base security, medical facilities, and rules of engagement. She turned in her personal weapons for ones that had been zeroed for the environment and received additional gear designed for the climate and terrain. Most importantly, she met with the intelligence officer who would brief her on the current situation in her area of operations. Captain Williams was a woman about Maria's age who had been in Afghanistan for 6 months. She spoke quickly and efficiently, pointing to maps and photographs as she explained the complex tribal and political dynamics that Maria would need to navigate. "Your unit operates primarily in province," Captain Williams explained, indicating an area near the Pakistani border on a detailed topographic map. "It's mountainous terrain with villages scattered throughout the valleys. The population is predominantly Pashtun, and tribal loyalties are more important than any national government allegiance." She pulled up a series of photographs on her laptop. "These are some of the key tribal leaders in your area. Knowing who's related to whom and who has disputes with whom could be the difference between a successful mission and walking into an ambush." Maria studied the faces, trying to memorize not just their names but the complex web of relationships that connected them. Some were allies of the Afghan government, others were neutral, and a few were suspected of providing support to insurgent groups. The intelligence officer emphasized that these allegiances could shift quickly based on circumstances. "The Rangers you'll be working with are good people," Captain Williams continued. "They've been operating in that area for several months, and they've built some solid relationships with local leaders. But they need someone who can communicate more effectively than pointing and using hand gestures." The next day, Maria caught a helicopter ride to forward operating Base Chapman, a smaller base closer to her unit's area of operations. The flight took her over some of the most spectacular and forbidding terrain she had ever seen. Massive peaks rose thousands of feet above narrow valleys, where small villages clung to hillsides like ancient settlements from another age. Her pilot, a young warrant officer with the confident demeanor that seemed common among helicopter crews, pointed out landmarks as they flew. "That's the valley down there. We call it the Valley of Death. A lot of good soldiers have died in that stretch of ground." Maria looked down at the peaceful-looking valley with its terraced fields and small compounds scattered along the river. It was hard to imagine it as a place of violence and death. The disconnect between the beauty of the landscape and the deadly realities of war would be something she encountered again and again in the months ahead. Fob Chapman was much smaller than, with maybe 200 soldiers and support personnel. The base was built around a collection of shipping containers that had been converted into living and working spaces, surrounded by concrete blast barriers and guard towers. It had the feel of a frontier outpost, which in many ways it was. Staff Sergeant, the Ranger team leader she would be working with, met her at the helicopter landing zone. He was a compact man with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that she was learning to associate with special operations soldiers. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Santos," he said as they walked toward the Ranger compound. "Hope you're ready for some interesting work." The Ranger compound was separate from the main base, with its own living areas and operations center. The team consisted of 12 men, most of them in their 20s, all of them professionals who had earned their way into one of the Army's most elite units. They welcomed Maria with the kind of cautious friendliness that soldiers extended to newcomers until they proved themselves. Sergeant introduced her to the team and explained how she would fit into their operations. "Santos speaks Pashto and knows the culture," he told the group. "She'll be coming with us on missions where we need to interact with locals or gather intelligence that requires more than basic conversation." One of the rangers, a young specialist named Jackson, raised his hand. "Sergeant, no offense to Santos, but is she qualified to operate with us? I mean, she's a translator, not a ranger." Nodded. "Good question. Santos went through the same pre-deployment training that all our attached personnel complete. She's qualified on all our weapon systems and has met our physical standards. More importantly, she's a soldier first and a translator second." That afternoon, Maria participated in her first team training exercise. The Rangers ran through a scenario based on a real mission they had conducted the previous week. They practiced movement techniques, communication procedures, and immediate action drills for various contingencies. Maria's job was to stay with and be ready to translate if they encountered local nationals. The exercise went well, but Maria could feel the team evaluating her performance. She kept up with their pace during movement, followed proper procedures for weapon safety, and asked intelligent questions about tactics. By the end of the day, she sensed that she had passed some kind of informal test. That evening, she sat with the team in their common area as they cleaned weapons and prepared equipment for the next day's mission. The conversation was casual but informative, ranging from family back home to observations about the local area and its people. Specialist, a quiet young man from Montana, was working on his rifle when he looked up at Maria. "Santos, you ever been in a firefight before?" Maria shook her head. "No, this is my first deployment." "Well, if you stick with us long enough, you probably will be," said matter-of-factly. "Just remember your training and do what the team leaders tell you. Most people do fine once they get used to it." The casualness with which he discussed the possibility of combat struck Maria. For these men, being shot at was just part of the job, no more remarkable than a construction worker discussing the possibility of bad weather. She wondered if she would ever develop that kind of professional detachment. Her first mission came 3 days later. The Rangers were conducting a key leader engagement with a village elder who had information about insurgent activity in his area. The meeting was scheduled to take place in the elder's compound, which meant the team would be operating in a potentially hostile environment with limited backup. Maria spent the evening before the mission studying her notes on the elder and his family. Haji was in his 60s, a respected tribal leader who controlled a strategic valley that insurgents used as a transit route. He had been cooperative with coalition forces in the past, but intelligence reports suggested that he was under pressure from insurgent groups to stop providing information. "The key thing to remember," briefed the team, "is that this is his territory and we're guests. Santos will handle the formal greetings and negotiations, but everyone needs to be respectful and alert. If Haji has decided to work with the bad guys, this could go sideways quickly." The mission launched before dawn, with the team traveling in 2 up-armored Humvees along a route that intelligence assessed as relatively secure. Maria rode in the second vehicle, wearing full combat gear and carrying her M4 rifle. The weight of the equipment and the reality of the situation made her mouth dry despite the early morning cool. The drive took them through spectacular mountain scenery as the sun rose over the peaks. They passed through several small villages where children waved at the American vehicles and adults watched from doorways with expressions that were hard to read. Some seemed friendly, others appeared suspicious or fearful. Haji's compound was built into a hillside overlooking a valley where terraced fields stretched down to a small river. Traditional Afghan architecture blended with more modern additions, creating a complex that spoke of prosperity and long-established roots in the area. Armed guards at the entrance were expecting the American patrol and directed them to a parking area inside the compound walls. As they dismounted from their vehicles, Maria felt the weight of cultural responsibility settle on her shoulders. Everything about this interaction would depend on her ability to navigate not just language differences, but complex social customs that had developed over centuries. Haji emerged from the main building accompanied by several younger men who were clearly his sons or nephews. He was a tall, dignified man with a carefully maintained beard and traditional Afghan clothing that looked expensive. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as he observed the American soldiers. Maria stepped forward with and delivered the formal Pashto greeting that she had practiced dozens of times. "Peace be upon you, respected elder. We are honored by your willingness to meet with us." Haji's response was equally formal, but Maria caught subtle nuances in his tone and word choice that suggested he was testing her linguistic abilities. He was speaking a very pure, traditional form of Pashto that would be difficult for someone with only basic language skills to understand. "And upon you, peace, young sister. Your Pashto is quite good for an American. Did you learn it from books or did you have proper teachers?" The question was both a compliment and a challenge. Maria responded carefully, acknowledging her teachers while demonstrating that she understood the cultural implications of his words. "I was fortunate to learn from Afghan teachers who shared not only their language but their wisdom about and the proper ways of respect. They taught me that language without understanding is like a sword without skill, potentially dangerous to the wielder." Haji smiled for the first time, and Maria sensed that she had passed his initial test. The conversation moved to formal pleasantries about health, family, and the weather while tea was prepared and served. This was all part of the cultural protocol that had to be observed before any serious business could be conducted. As they sat in Haji's reception room drinking sweet tea and eating traditional sweets, Maria found herself functioning as more than just a translator. She was interpreting not just words but cultural cues, helping understand the significance of various statements and gestures that might not be obvious to an outsider. When Haji mentioned that his youngest son was studying engineering in Kabul, Maria recognized it as an indirect way of establishing his commitment to Afghanistan's future development. When he asked about his family, she helped the sergeant respond in a way that would demonstrate appropriate respect for family values while maintaining operational security. The actual intelligence discussion was conducted with elaborate courtesy and indirection. Haji never explicitly stated that insurgents were operating in his area, but he made references to unwelcome visitors and young men with dangerous ideas that everyone understood. Maria had to translate not just his words, but the implications behind them. "The respected elder is telling us that there are insurgent groups using the valley to move supplies and personnel," she quietly explained too. "But he's also indicating that he's under pressure not to share information with us. He's asking for our protection without directly requesting it." Nodded and responded through Maria, offering assurances about coalition forces' commitment to protecting their allies while asking for more specific information about timing and numbers. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Maria serving as the bridge between two very different military and cultural traditions. Near the end of the meeting, Haji made a statement that caused Maria to pause before translating. He had said that his hospitality extended to all guests who came in peace, but that he could not be responsible for the safety of those who brought trouble to his valley. The warning was polite but unmistakable. As they prepared to leave, Maria participated in the elaborate farewell protocols that were as important as the initial greetings. She thanked Haji for his hospitality and wisdom, while he praised her language skills and cultural understanding. But she also noticed that some of the younger men in his compound were watching the American soldiers with expressions that seemed less than friendly. The drive back to the base passed without incident, but debriefed the team about the intelligence they had gathered and the cultural dynamics they had observed. Maria's contribution to the mission was significant, not just her translation work, but her insights into what Haji had really been telling them. "Good work today, Santos," told her as they turned in their weapons back at base. "You caught things that I would have missed completely. That's exactly why we need someone with your skills." But Maria had also learned something about herself during the mission. When they had entered Haji, compound with limited backup and uncertain loyalties, she had felt the same alertness and readiness that she had observed in the Rangers. Her hand had stayed near her weapon, and her eyes had continuously scanned for potential threats. She was still a translator, but she was also becoming something more. That night, she wrote in her journal about the day's events. She described the beautiful mountain scenery and the complex cultural interactions that had made the mission successful. But she also wrote about the moment when she had realized that she was truly in a combat zone, where a misunderstood word or cultural mistake could have deadly consequences. Over the following weeks, Maria went on several more missions with the Ranger team. Each one taught her something new about operating in Afghanistan and about herself. She learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether a village was friendly or hostile. She developed an intuitive sense for when conversations were going well and when tensions were building. More importantly, she earned the respect of the rangers she worked with. They saw that she could keep up with their pace, that she stayed calm under pressure, and that her cultural and linguistic skills made their missions more effective. She was no longer just an attached translator, but a valued member of the team. The rangers also taught her things that hadn't been covered in her formal training. They showed her how to move quietly through different types of terrain, how to observe and remember details that might be important later, and how to maintain situational awareness in complex environments. Without realizing it, she was learning skills that would prove crucial when everything went wrong. 3 months into her deployment, Maria had settled into a routine that balanced mission work with the daily requirements of military life on a forward operating base. She maintained her equipment, participated in training exercises, and spent her free time studying intelligence reports and improving her understanding of local dialects and customs. She also developed friendships with some of the other soldiers on the base. There was Lieutenant, a logistics officer who had grown up speaking Mandarin and understood the challenges of operating between cultures. There was Sergeant Williams, a medic who taught Maria advanced first aid techniques and shared her concerns about the limited medical facilities available at their remote location. But it was her relationship with the Rangers that mattered most to her daily work. She had proven herself as a reliable team member, and they had accepted her as one of their own. When Specialist Jackson, who had initially questioned her qualifications, was wounded by an improvised explosive device, Maria was one of the soldiers who helped carry him to the medical evacuation helicopter. The IED incident was Maria's first real exposure to combat casualties. Jackson survived, but seeing a young soldier she had worked with and talked with every day suddenly bloodied and broken was a shock that her training hadn't fully prepared her for. The casual way the team dealt with the incident, treating it as an unfortunate but routine part of their work, helped her understand something about the mental resilience required for this kind of warfare. "It's part of the job," explained to her later. "We do everything we can to minimize the risks, but we can't eliminate them. The key is to learn from each incident and use that knowledge to keep everyone safer in the future." Maria was still processing these lessons about combat and sacrifice when she received word that she would be participating in a major operation planned for the following week. The Rangers had been tasked with conducting a series of raids against insurgent safe houses in a valley that had been largely off-limits to coalition forces. Her role would be crucial for gathering intelligence and managing interactions with local civilians who might be caught up in the operation. As she prepared for what would be her most challenging mission yet, Maria reflected on how much she had changed since arriving in Afghanistan. She was still a translator, but she was also a soldier who had learned to operate effectively in one of the world's most dangerous environments. She had earned the respect of some of the Army's most elite warriors, and she had proven to herself that she could handle responsibilities she had never imagined. What she didn't know was that the mission would go terribly wrong, and that the mission briefing took place in the Rangers Operations Center at 600 hours on a Tuesday morning. Maria had been awake since 4:30, going through her pre-mission routine of checking equipment, reviewing intelligence files, and running through Pashto phrases she might need during the operation. The familiar ritual helped calm her nerves before what everyone acknowledged would be a high-risk mission. Captain Mitchell, the company commander, stood before a large map of the target area as the assault teams gathered around him. Maria was the only woman in the room, but after months of working with these soldiers, she felt no sense of being out of place. She had earned her spot at this briefing through competence and reliability, just like everyone else. "Intelligence indicates that we have multiple high-value targets operating out of compounds in the district," Captain Mitchell began, pointing to a series of marked locations on the map. "These are senior insurgent leaders who have been coordinating attacks against coalition forces and threatening local officials who cooperate with the Afghan government. The operation would involve 3 separate assault teams hitting different compounds simultaneously to prevent the targets from being warned and escaping. Maria would accompany the team led by, targeting a compound that intelligence believed housed both insurgent leaders and their families. Her job would be to manage any interactions with civilians and gather intelligence from documents or computer equipment they might find. The key challenge: Captain Mitchell continued, is that these compounds are located in a valley that has very limited access routes. We'll be going in by helicopter and establishing a blocking position to prevent escape, but exfiltration will be by ground convoy due to the terrain limitations for helicopter landing zones. He traced a route on the map that wound through narrow mountain passes and several small villages. The convoy route takes us through about 15 kilometers of potentially hostile territory. Intelligence assesses the threat as moderate, but we all know how quickly that can change. Briefed Maria on her specific responsibilities during each phase of the mission. During the assault phase, she would stay close to the team leader and be ready to communicate with any civilians they encountered. During the site exploitation phase, she would help translate any documents they found and manage interactions with detained personnel. During the convoy phase, she would monitor radio communications and be prepared to help if they encountered any local nationals along the route. The mission launched at midnight, with the assault teams loading onto helicopters for the flight to the target area. Maria had participated in several helicopter insertions during her time with the Rangers, but night operations always added an element of complexity and danger. Flying through mountain terrain in the darkness required precise navigation and perfect coordination between pilots and ground forces. As they flew through the mountain passes, Maria could see the lights of small villages scattered throughout the valleys below. Most of Afghanistan was without reliable electricity, so the few lights visible represented generators or traditional lamps in family compounds. She wondered what the people in those houses thought when they heard American helicopters passing overhead in the night. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with all three assault teams reaching their designated landing zones without incident. Maria's team moved quickly through the darkness toward their target compound, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain. The Rangers moved with the quiet efficiency that came from months of working together in this environment. The compound was larger than it had appeared in the satellite photographs, with multiple buildings connected by high walls and what appeared to be extensive gardens or agricultural areas. Intelligence had been correct about the presence of families. They could hear children crying and women's voices as they approached the main building. The assault itself was textbook perfect. The Rangers breached the compound walls simultaneously at multiple points, overwhelming any resistance before the occupants could organize an effective defense. Maria followed through the main entrance, her rifle ready but her primary focus on identifying civilians who needed to be separated from any potential combatants. Inside the compound, they found exactly what intelligence had predicted. Several adult males who matched the descriptions of known insurgent leaders were detained without incident. But there were also women and children who were clearly terrified by the sudden appearance of armed American soldiers in their home. This was where Maria's training and cultural knowledge became crucial. She immediately began speaking to the women in Pashto, using formal, respectful language to explain that no one would be harmed if they cooperated. Her presence as a female soldier helped reduce some of the cultural tensions that might have escalated the situation. "Please tell the honored mothers that we mean no harm to their families," she told the eldest woman present, who appeared to be the grandmother of several children. "We are here only for the men who have been fighting against the government. If everyone stays calm and follows our instructions, no one will be hurt." The woman responded cautiously, asking if the Americans intended to search the women's quarters and whether the children would be separated from their mothers. These were legitimate concerns based on cultural values and previous experiences with military operations. Maria consulted quickly before responding. "The children will stay with their mothers, and only female soldiers will search the women's areas if any searching is necessary. We understand the proper customs and will respect them." While some Rangers processed the detainees and others searched for weapons and intelligence materials, Maria worked with the civilian women to keep the situation calm and gather information about the compound's layout and the activities of the men who had been arrested. Her ability to communicate respectfully while still extracting useful intelligence made the operation much more effective than it would have been with only basic language skills. The site exploitation phase revealed significant intelligence finds. The Rangers discovered documents detailing planned attacks against coalition forces and Afghan government targets. There were also communications equipment and financial records that would help intelligence analysts track insurgent networks and funding sources. Maria translated key documents on the spot, helping the team identify which materials were most important to bring back for further analysis. Her language skills extended beyond basic Pashto to include the religious and legal terminology often used in insurgent communications. By 400 hours, the assault phase was complete, and all teams had accomplished their objectives. Several high-value targets had been captured, significant intelligence had been gathered, and the operation had been conducted without any coalition casualties. As they prepared to move to the extraction point, everyone felt the satisfaction of a successful mission. The convoy formation included 4 up-armored Humvees carrying the assault teams, detainees, and intelligence materials. Maria rode in the second vehicle and 3 other rangers. The route would take them through mountain passes and several villages before reaching a secure area where helicopters could pick them up. The first hour of the convoy movement passed without incident. They drove through spectacular mountain scenery as dawn broke over the peaks, following dirt roads that had been carved into hillsides by generations of local traffic. The vehicles maintained proper spacing and speed, while the gunners scanned constantly for potential threats. Maria used the time to review the documents they had captured, making notes about key names and locations that might be important for follow-up operations. She also monitored the radio communications between vehicles, listening for any changes in the tactical situation. As they entered a valley that contained several small villages, the convoy slowed to navigate around civilian traffic and agricultural equipment. This was always a vulnerable time, when military vehicles had to reduce speed and were surrounded by potential hiding places for insurgent fighters. The first sign of trouble came from the lead vehicle. "Contact front," the gunner reported over the radio. Multiple military-age males moving into positions along the immediately ordered the convoy to increase speed while maintaining proper intervals. The vehicles began moving faster through the valley, but the terrain limited their options for maneuvering. High on both sides created a natural kill zone where insurgents could position themselves with clear fields of fire. "All vehicles be advised, we have movement on both sides of the road," the lead vehicle reported. "Looks like we're driving into a planned ambush." Maria felt her heart rate increase as the tactical situation deteriorated. This was what the Rangers had trained for, but it was her first time in a convoy under fire. She checked her equipment and made sure her rifle was ready while monitoring the radio communications for any instructions that might require translation. The attack began with a rocket-propelled grenade that impacted near the lead vehicle, followed immediately by automatic weapons fire from multiple positions along the sound was overwhelming explosions, machine gun fire, and the crack of bullets passing close to their vehicle. "IED front," someone shouted over the radio, and Maria felt their Humvee swerve violently as the driver tried to avoid a roadside bomb that had been triggered remotely. The explosion shook their vehicle and covered the windshield with dust and debris. In the space of 30 seconds, the convoy had gone from a routine movement to a full-scale firefight. The Rangers immediately began returning fire while trying to maintain forward momentum and get out of the kill zone. But the insurgents had chosen their position well. The convoy was trapped in a narrow valley with limited options for escape or maneuver. "Vehicle 3 is hit," came the report over the radio. "We've got casualties and the engine is smoking. We're not going to make it much farther." Made the decision that would define the next several hours. "All vehicles, establish a defensive perimeter around Vehicle 3. We'll hold this position and call for air support." The convoy moved into a formation that provided some protection for the disabled vehicle while maintaining the ability to return fire. Maria's vehicle took a position facing north, with the gunner engaging targets on the while the driver maneuvered to provide a stable firing platform. This was the moment when everything Maria had learned during her months with the Rangers became crucial. She was no longer just a translator observing a military operation. She was a soldier in a firefight where her actions could determine whether her teammates lived or died. "Santos, I need you to get on the radio and call for close air support," ordered while returning fire with his rifle. "Use the frequencies we discussed in briefings and give them our grid coordinates." Maria had practiced this procedure dozens of times during training, but doing it while under fire was completely different. She had to concentrate on proper radio protocol and navigation procedures while bullets were impacting around their vehicle and explosions were shaking the ground. Lightning 6, this is Ranger 27, requesting immediate close air support. Grid 42, SQB 123-456. Troops in contact with estimated 40 insurgent fighters in prepared positions, she transmitted, surprised by how calm her voice sounded despite the chaos around her. The response came quickly. Ranger 27, Lightning 6, copy your request. We have two A-10s 5 minutes out. Stand by for talk on. While waiting for air support, Maria found herself doing things she had never expected to do. When the ranger next to her was wounded by shrapnel from a near miss, she applied the combat first aid techniques she had learned while still maintaining radio communications with the aircraft that were coming to help them. The wounded ranger, specialist from Montana, had taken metal fragments in his shoulder and arm. He was conscious and alert, but bleeding heavily enough to require immediate attention. "Stay with me," Maria said while applying pressure to his wounds. "The bleeding isn't too bad and you're going to be fine. Just keep talking to me and stay awake." She had to divide her attention between treating injuries and helping coordinate the air support that was arriving overhead. The A-10 pilots needed precise information about friendly and enemy positions to avoid hitting the wrong targets. Lightning 6, we have friendlies in 4 vehicles in defensive positions around Grid 42, SQB 123-456. Enemy positions are on approximately 300 meters north and south of our location, requesting gun runs on the southern first. The A-10s began their attack runs with devastating effect. The 30 cannon fire from the aircraft could be heard and felt even from several hundred meters away, and the insurgent fire slackened significantly as the enemy fighters took cover or were eliminated. But the air support also revealed the true scope of the ambush. As the aircraft circled overhead, the pilots reported additional insurgent positions that hadn't been visible from ground level. The convoy was facing a much larger enemy force than anyone had initially realized. Ranger 27, Lightning 6, we're seeing movement in multiple locations around your position. This looks like a company-sized enemy force with prepared positions and heavy weapons. You're going to need more than just air support to get out of this. Was already thinking along the same lines. Santos, get on the radio and request ground reinforcements. We need a relief column with armor support and we need it fast. The tactical situation was becoming more complex by the minute. The convoy was pinned down in a valley with limited cover, facing a large enemy force that had obviously planned this ambush carefully. Several Rangers were wounded, one vehicle was disabled, and they were running low on ammunition for the crew-served weapons. Maria found herself functioning as the primary communications link between the trapped convoy and the various elements that were trying to help them. She coordinated with the air support overhead, the relief column that was being assembled at Fob Chapman, and the medical evacuation helicopters that would be needed for the wounded. Each radio conversation required precise military terminology and clear communication of complex tactical information. But Maria also found herself using skills she had never expected to need: combat medical training, ammunition management, and basic infantry tactics. When the insurgents attempted to flank their position using a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the road, Maria was the first to spot the movement and alert the team. "We've got movement in the ditch line to our east. Looks like 4 or 5 fighters trying to get close enough for grenades." The ability to observe, analyze, and communicate tactical information while under fire was something that couldn't be taught in a classroom. It required the kind of calm thinking under pressure that came from confidence in training and trust in teammates. As the firefight continued, Maria realized that she had crossed some kind of invisible line. She was no longer a translator who happened to be armed. She was a soldier who happened to speak languages. The distinction would prove crucial in the hours ahead as the situation continued to deteriorate and the convoy faced challenges that would test everyone's limits. The radio crackled with an update from the relief column. "Ranger 27, this is Charlie 6. We're still 40 minutes out due to IED threats on the main route. Can you hold your position?" Maria looked around at her teammates, some wounded, all tired, but still fighting effectively despite the overwhelming odds. She keyed the radio microphone and gave the only answer that made sense. Charlie 6, Ranger 27 will hold as long as necessary. Just get here as fast as you can. The firefight had been going on for 2 hours when Maria noticed that the ammunition supply was becoming critical. The Rangers were trained to manage their ammunition carefully, but the intensity and duration of the battle was forcing them to expend rounds faster than anyone had anticipated. The crew-served weapons that provided their heaviest firepower were down to their last few hundred rounds. "We need to start thinking about ammunition resupply," she reported while continuing to treat specialists' wounds. "The gunners are reporting low on ammo, and I count at least 6 magazines left between the 4 of us." Nodded grimly while scanning through his rifle scope. "Copy that. I'll check with the other vehicles and see what our overall situation looks like." The tactical picture was becoming increasingly challenging. The A-10s had inflicted significant casualties on the insurgent forces, but enemy fighters continued to move into positions around the convoy. The disabled Humvee was leaking fluids and wouldn't be moving under its own power anytime soon. Most critically, several Rangers were wounded severely enough to require immediate medical evacuation. Maria found herself taking on responsibilities she had never trained for. With wounded and another Ranger busy manning the vehicle's machine gun, she became the primary radio operator for coordinating multiple support elements while also providing medical care and maintaining situational awareness. "Lightning 6, this is Ranger 27, she transmitted to the A-10s circling overhead. "We're going to need close coordination with the medevac bird when it arrives. Can you provide cover for the landing zone?" "Ranger 27, Lightning 6, Roger. Be advised the medevac is still 20 minutes out due to the threat level in this area. They're going to need the LZ completely secure before they'll attempt to land." The medical evacuation was crucial, but it would also be extremely dangerous. The helicopter would have to land in an area that was still under fire, load wounded soldiers while exposed to enemy weapons, and take off again through airspace where insurgents might have shoulder-fired missiles. Maria was coordinating the medevac procedures when the tactical situation suddenly got much worse. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the convoy's lead vehicle. All vehicles, we have dismounted fighters approaching from the north. Estimate 15 to 20 individuals with RPGs and automatic weapons. They're using the village buildings as cover and moving toward our position." Immediately began repositioning his soldiers to meet this new threat. "Santos, I need you to get on the radio and warn the air support about those dismounted fighters. If they get close enough to use grenades, we're going to have serious problems." But as Maria reached for the radio handset, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A group of insurgent fighters had worked their way around to the east side of their position, using terrain features that weren't visible from the convoy's current location. They were less than 100 meters away and moving closer under cover of smoke and dust. "Contact east," she shouted while grabbing her rifle. "Multiple dismounts moving in our direction." The next few minutes became a blur of training and instinct taking over where conscious thought couldn't keep up. Maria found herself engaging enemy targets with her M4 rifle while simultaneously trying to maintain radio communications and monitor medical condition. The insurgent fighters were well-trained and equipped with modern weapons. They moved tactically, using cover and concealment effectively while maintaining coordinated fire on the American positions. But they had underestimated the quality of training and determination of the soldiers they were fighting. Maria's marksmanship training from basic combat training served her well. The steady hands and calm breathing that had impressed her instructors months earlier allowed her to engage targets accurately even under the stress of combat. She fired controlled pairs of rounds at insurgent fighters while called out target locations and coordinated the team's defensive fires. "Target 200 meters behind the large boulder," called out. "I see muzzle flashes and movement." Maria acquired the target through her rifle sights and squeezed off 2 quick shots. The insurgent fighter dropped behind cover, and she couldn't tell if she had hit him or if he was simply taking cover from the incoming fire. The intensity of the battle was unlike anything she could have imagined during training. The sound of bullets passing overhead had a distinctive crack that was completely different from the impact of rounds hitting nearby rocks or vehicle armor. Explosions from RPGs and grenades created pressure waves that could be felt as well as heard. But despite the chaos and violence around her, Maria found herself functioning with a clarity and focus that surprised her. The radio procedures she had memorized became automatic responses. The weapon handling skills she had practiced became muscle memory. The tactical thinking she had learned from working with the Rangers allowed her to anticipate threats and respond appropriately. Lightning 6, we need immediate fires on the eastern approach to our position, she transmitted while changing magazines in her rifle. Multiple dismounts within hand grenade range of friendly positions. The A-10s responded with devastating precision. The 30mm cannon fire walked across the hillside where the insurgent fighters were positioned, eliminating the immediate threat to the convoy. But Maria could see more enemy movement in other directions, suggesting that this was just one part of a larger, coordinated attack. The radio brought news that was both encouraging and concerning. Ranger 27, this is Charlie 6. We're 15 minutes from your position, but we're taking contact along the route. The enemy has established multiple blocking positions between us and you. Made a quick assessment of their tactical situation. They were running low on ammunition, had several wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention, and were facing a determined enemy force that seemed to have unlimited reinforcements. The relief column was close, but was also engaged in fighting. Santos, I need you to coordinate with higher headquarters about bringing in additional air support, ordered, and see if you can get an update on when that medevac is going to be able to get in here. Maria was switching between radio frequencies when she noticed something that changed everything. While monitoring the insurgent radio communications using the equipment in their Humvee, she heard transmissions in Pashto that revealed crucial tactical information. I'm intercepting enemy radio traffic, she reported. They're planning to hit the relief column with a major ambush at the bridge crossing about 5 kilometers south of here. They've got anti-tank weapons positioned there. This intelligence could save the lives of the soldiers in the relief column, but it also revealed the scope of the enemy planning. The insurgents weren't just conducting a random attack on the convoy. They had orchestrated a complex operation designed to isolate the Rangers and destroy both them and their reinforcements. Can you get that information to Charlie 6 immediately? Asked while engaging another group of insurgent fighters. Maria switched to the frequency used by the relief column and transmitted the warning. Charlie 6, this is Ranger 27. Be advised, enemy forces have established an ambush position with anti-tank weapons at the bridge crossing approximately 5 kilometers south of our position. Recommend alternate route or airstrikes on that location. The response came quickly. Ranger 27, Charlie 6, copy your intelligence. We're requesting immediate airstrikes on that location and will find an alternate route. Thanks for the heads up. But sharing that intelligence also revealed to Maria how desperate their situation was becoming. The insurgents had planned this operation carefully, with multiple elements designed to prevent any relief or reinforcement of the trapped convoy. They were facing a sophisticated enemy force with good intelligence, modern equipment, and detailed knowledge of the terrain. The medevac helicopter finally arrived, but the landing zone was still under fire from insurgent positions on the surrounding. The pilot was willing to attempt the evacuation, but only if the Rangers could suppress enemy fire long enough for him to land, load the wounded, and take off again. All vehicles, we need concentrated fires on the southern for the next 5 minutes, ordered. Medevac is coming in and we need to keep their heads down. Maria found herself directing the suppressive fire while also preparing, and the other wounded Rangers for evacuation. The coordination required split-second timing and perfect communication between ground forces, air support, and the medical helicopter. As the medevac approached, Maria could see insurgent fighters moving into positions to engage the helicopter with rocket-propelled grenades. She grabbed the radio handset and transmitted warnings to the pilot while simultaneously engaging targets with her rifle. 7-2, you have RPG teams moving into position on your 3 o'clock side. Recommend aborting this approach and coming in from the north. The helicopter pilot acknowledged the warning and adjusted his approach, but Maria could see that the insurgents were repositioning to engage from the new direction. The situation was becoming a deadly chess game where every move had to be calculated perfectly. Lightning 6, I need immediate gun runs on grid 42, SQB 125-458, she transmitted to the A-10s. Enemy RPG teams threatening medevac aircraft. The close air support arrived just as the helicopter touched down. The 30 cannon fire from the A-10s forced the insurgent fighters to take cover while the flight medics quickly loaded, and 2 other wounded Rangers onto the aircraft. Maria helped carry to the helicopter, and as they loaded him onto a stretcher, he grabbed her arm and said something that would stay with her forever. "Santos, you saved my life today. You're a warrior, not just a translator." The medevac took off successfully, but the departure of the helicopter seemed to trigger another wave of insurgent attacks. Enemy fighters who had been keeping their distance began moving closer to the convoy positions, apparently sensing that the Americans were weakening. Maria had been in continuous combat for over 3 hours. Her uniform was torn and dirty, her hands were stained with blood, and her rifle barrel was hot from repeated firing. But she had never felt more alert or focused in her life. The radio brought an update from the relief column. "Ranger 27, Charlie 6, we've found an alternate route and are moving to your location. ETA 10 minutes, but we're still taking fire." 10 minutes seemed like an eternity under the circumstances, but Maria could see that the Rangers around her were preparing for one final push. They had conserved their remaining ammunition and were ready to break contact and move to link up with the relief force. Gathered his remaining soldiers for a quick briefing. "When Charlie 6 gets here, we're going to load up the detainees and intelligence materials and get out of this valley as fast as possible. Santos, I'll need you to coordinate the link-up and make sure we don't have any friendly fire incidents." Maria nodded, checking her rifle and radio equipment one more time. She had started this mission as a translator supporting a special operations team. She was ending it as a combat veteran who had earned her place among some of the Army's most elite soldiers. But even as the relief column approached and the immediate threat began to diminish, Maria knew that this day had changed her fundamentally. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she had never suspected existed. She had functioned effectively under the most extreme stress imaginable and had saved lives through her actions. As the first vehicles of the relief column appeared in the distance, Maria realized that she was no longer the same person who had left Fob Chapman that morning. The translator who had worried about cultural protocols and proper grammar had been replaced by someone who could fight, communicate, and lead under F. The arrival of the relief column should have marked the end of the ordeal, but the insurgents had one final surprise waiting. As the additional Humvees and armored vehicles moved into the valley to link up with the trapped Rangers, enemy fighters triggered a series of coordinated attacks designed to destroy both the original convoy and their reinforcements. Maria was coordinating the link-up procedures when massive explosions erupted across the valley floor. The insurgents had prepared the battlefield with multiple improvised explosive devices, turning the rescue operation into an even deadlier trap. 3 vehicles from the relief column were disabled immediately, and the sound of automatic weapons fire filled the air from every direction. All stations, this is Charlie 6, came the urgent radio transmission. "We are taking heavy casualties and have multiple vehicles down. Request immediate close air support and medical evacuation for at least 8 wounded. Assess the tactical situation quickly. Instead of being rescued, they were now part of an even larger force that was pinned down in an elaborate kill zone. The insurgents had used the original convoy as bait to draw in additional American forces, creating an opportunity to inflict maximum casualties. Santos, get on the radio and coordinate air support for the entire operation," ordered. "We need everything they can send us, and we need it now." Maria had been managing communications for a single team, but now she was coordinating support for a force of over 30 soldiers spread across multiple vehicles in a complex tactical situation. The scale and complexity of the communications requirements would have challenged experienced battle staff officers, but she had no choice except to handle it herself. "Lightning 6, this is Ranger 27. We now have combined elements in contact. Approximately 30 friendlies in defensive positions throughout Grid Square 42, SQB 123-456. Enemy forces estimated at company strength with prepared positions and heavy weapons. Requesting immediate close air support and medevac for multiple casualties." The response revealed the magnitude of what they were facing. "Ranger 27, Lightning 6, copy your situation. Be advised we have additional aircraft en route to your location, including AC-130 gunships and fast movers. This appears to be the largest insurgent operation in this area in over 2 years. While coordinating air support, Maria found herself taking on additional responsibilities that had nothing to do with translation or communications. When the medic from the relief column was wounded by shrapnel, she became the primary medical care provider for several injured soldiers who needed immediate attention. Staff Sergeant Collins from the relief force had taken a bullet through his leg that had shattered his femur and caused massive bleeding. Using the combat medical training she had received months earlier, Maria applied a tourniquet and pressure bandages while calling for urgent medical evacuation. "Collins, stay with me," she said while working on his wounds. "The bleeding is under control and medevac is en route. You're going to make it through this, but I need you to stay conscious and keep talking to me." Collins was a veteran with multiple deployments who had seen plenty of combat, but the severity of his wounds and the intensity of the battle had shaken his usual composure. "Santos, how bad is it? I can't feel my foot and there's blood everywhere." "The wound is serious but not life-threatening if we get you evacuated quickly," Maria replied with more confidence than she felt. "The tourniquet is controlling the bleeding, and feeling loss is normal with this type of injury. Just focus on staying awake and breathing normally." While treating Collins, Maria continued to monitor radio communications and coordinate the increasingly complex battle. The AC-130 gunships had arrived overhead and were engaging insurgent positions with devastating firepower, but enemy fighters continued to maneuver and attack from new directions. The tactical situation was complicated by the presence of several local civilians who had been caught in the battle area when the fighting began. Maria could hear women and children in a nearby compound that was taking fire from both sides. The civilians were trapped between American forces and insurgent fighters, unable to escape to safety. "There are civilians in that compound to our northeast," Maria reported. "I can hear children crying and women calling for help. They're right in the middle of the fire zone." This created an impossible tactical dilemma. The Rangers couldn't effectively engage insurgent positions near the compound without risking civilian casualties, but the insurgents were using the civilian presence as cover to attack American forces. Maria made a decision that went far beyond her role as a translator. "I'm going to move to that compound and try to get those civilians out of the danger area." Immediately objected. "Santos, that's way too dangerous. We don't know how many enemy fighters are in that area, and you'd be exposed to fire from multiple directions." But Maria had already made up her mind. "Sergeant, those civilians are going to die if they stay where they are, and we can't effectively engage the enemy positions as long as they're there. I can communicate with them in Pashto and coordinate their movement to safety." The decision required approval from higher command, but the situation was deteriorating too rapidly for lengthy discussions. Captain Mitchell, the company commander, made the call over the radio. "Santos, you have authorization to attempt civilian evacuation, but only if you have adequate cover and support. This is voluntary, and you can abort if the situation becomes untenable." Maria checked her equipment one final time and prepared for what would be the most dangerous movement of her military career. She would have to cross approximately 50 meters of open ground under fire, communicate with terrified civilians in a combat zone, and coordinate their movement to safety, while insurgent fighters were using the same area as a base of operations. The movement to the compound required perfect timing with air support and suppressive fires from the Rangers. As the AC-130 engaged insurgent positions on the, Maria sprinted across the open ground while bullets impacted around her and explosions shook the earth. She reached the compound wall just as an RPG exploded against the opposite side, showering her with debris and dust. But she was alive and in a position to communicate with the civilians who were trapped inside. "Peace be upon you," she called out in Pashto. "I am an American soldier and I am here to help you get to safety. Can you hear me?" The response came immediately from multiple voices, women and children who had been huddled together in terror as the battle raged around them. "We hear you, sister. There are 12 of us here, including small children. The fighting men came to our compound and we could not leave." Maria quickly assessed the situation inside the compound. There were three families who had been visiting relatives when the insurgent fighters occupied their compound as a fighting position. The civilians included elderly grandparents, women, and children ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers. "Listen carefully," Maria told them. "The fighting men have left your compound, but there are still enemies in the area. I can lead you to safety, but you must follow my instructions exactly and move quickly when I tell you." The evacuation required coordination between Maria, the civilians, and the American forces, who would provide cover for their movement. She used her radio to coordinate with, and the air support overhead, while simultaneously organizing the civilian families for movement. "Lightning 6, this is Ranger 27 Alpha. I have 12 civilians ready for movement to safety. I need suppressive fires on the northern in 30 seconds, followed by smoke to conceal our movement." The air support responded perfectly, laying down covering fire that forced insurgent fighters to take cover, while smoke grenades created concealment for the civilian evacuation. Maria led the families across the open ground in small groups, carrying children who were too small to run and helping elderly family members who had difficulty moving quickly. The movement was terrifying but successful. All 12 civilians reached safety without casualties, despite continued insurgent fire and several near misses from RPGs. As the last family members were taken to cover behind American vehicles, Maria realized that she had just accomplished something that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived in Afghanistan. But the battle was still far from over. The successful civilian evacuation had exposed Maria to additional enemy observation, and insurgent fighters now knew exactly where she was positioned. As she moved back toward her original position, automatic weapons fire began impacting around her location with increasing accuracy. An insurgent sniper had apparently identified her as a high-value target, possibly because of her role in coordinating air support and communications. Bullets began hitting within inches of her position, forcing her to take cover behind a low stone wall that provided minimal protection. "Santos, can you move to a different position?" called over the radio. "You've got someone with a good rifle zeroed in on your location." But moving would expose Maria to fire from multiple directions, and her current position was crucial for maintaining communications with air support and medical evacuation helicopters. She was pinned down by accurate sniper fire with limited options for escape or maneuver. The solution came from an unexpected source. One of the Afghan civilians she had rescued, a teenage boy named, had observed the insurgent sniper's position from his family's compound. Despite the danger, he moved to Maria's location to provide intelligence about enemy positions. "Sister Soldier," he said in accented but clear English, "the bad man with the rifle is in the old watchtower on the hill. I know a way to move behind him if you can provide covering fire." His offer to help was both brave and potentially crucial to breaking the tactical stalemate. But accepting assistance from a civilian, especially a teenager, went against every military protocol and safety procedure Maria had been taught. She made another decision that transcended her training and reached into something deeper about duty, courage, and the bonds that could form between people under extreme circumstances. "I appreciate your courage, but this is too dangerous for you. You've done enough by helping your family get to safety." But was insistent. "Sister, this is my home and my family. The bad men came to our valley and brought war to our village. I will help you stop them." The conversation was interrupted by increased insurgent activity as enemy fighters began massing for what appeared to be a final assault on the American positions. Intelligence reports indicated that additional insurgent reinforcements were moving toward the battle area, potentially overwhelming the combined American force despite their air support advantage. Maria found herself at the center of a battle that had grown far beyond the original convoy attack. She was coordinating air support for a company-sized engagement, providing medical care for multiple casualties, and serving as the primary communications link between ground forces and various support elements. The fighting continued for another 2 hours as American forces systematically eliminated insurgent positions and established control over the valley. The combination of close air support, superior training, and determination eventually overcame the numerical advantage and prepared positions of the enemy force. As the last insurgent fighters were either eliminated or from the area, Maria finally had a moment to reflect on what had happened. She had participated in one of the largest battles involving American forces in that region, had saved multiple lives through her medical and communication skills, and had successfully evacuated civilian families from a combat zone. But more than that, she had discovered something fundamental about herself. Under the most extreme circumstances imaginable, she had functioned not just as a translator or support soldier, but as a complete warrior capable of fighting, leading, and making life-or-death decisions under fire. The evacuation helicopters finally arrived to collect the wounded and the captured intelligence materials. As Maria helped load the casualties onto the aircraft, several of the Rangers made comments that would stay with her forever. "Santos, I've seen a lot of soldiers in my career, but what you did today was exceptional," told her. "You saved lives, coordinated a complex battle, and showed courage that would be remarkable in any soldier, regardless of their military occupation specialty." The flight back to Fob Chapman gave Maria time to process what had happened. She looked at her hands, still stained with blood from treating wounded soldiers. Her uniform was torn and dirty, her equipment was battered from the battle, and her rifle showed the wear marks of heavy use in combat. But something else had changed that was less visible but more important. Maria Santos had entered that valley as a translator supporting a Ranger mission. She was leaving it as a proven combat veteran who had earned her place among America's elite warriors. The formal after-action review would document her actions and recommend her for several military decorations, including the Bronze Star Medal with V device for valor. But the real recognition came from the Rangers she had fought alongside, soldiers who had accepted her as one of their own. 3 months later, the convoy attack was almost over, but Maria's transformation was just beginning. In the final phase of the battle, she would discover what it truly meant to be a warrior. The battle was far from over, and the real test of everything Maria had learned was just beginning. Our test was still ahead of her. In a few days, she would find herself in a situation where her language skills would matter less than her ability to fight, and where everything she had learned about being a soldier would be put to the ultimate test between centuries of tradition and the chaos of modern warfare. And somewhere in the future, though Maria didn't know it yet, was a convoy attack on a dusty road that would change everything she thought she knew about who she was and what she was capable of becoming.